Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then I'd appreciate it if you left this video a like and subscribe to my channel to see future content like that. And today I'm actually debuting a sort of new thing on my channel. For the first time, I'm going to be talking about a TV series. And yes, I do regularly watch TV along with music and movies, but today's is one that I feel like I do have quite a bit to say about, and that is one of Disney Plus's newest originals, which is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Of course, this series has gotten hugely popular on Disney. It was originally conceived of as a limited series, but it is now being talked about that there will be a season 2 because of how hugely popular this show got, which isn't a huge surprise to me because of the amount of hype that was surrounding this show. Everyone had been wanting Ewan McGregor to come back as Obi-Wan for quite some time. I, like many others, think he was one of the best things about the prequel, so it was so exciting and almost surreal to hear that he was coming back. It didn't seem like something that was ever going to happen, but it finally did. And what's more, we got Hayden Christensen back too as Darth Vader. And that one might have surprised me even more because he really got treated badly by the Star Wars fandom in the prequel trilogy. Far worse than Ewan McGregor did, in my opinion. It was really cool to consider the fact that these two were going to be sharing the screen again in a sort of different context. So, of course, this series revolves around Obi-Wan Kenobi between episodes 3 and episodes 4 of the Skywalker saga, and it talks about Obi-Wan watching over Luke and sort of just making sure he's safe and everything like that. But while he is there, he gets a sort of message, a call to action from Organa, Leia's adopted father, that she is in need of sort of an escort by him, a sort of rescue mission, after she gets captured by some bounty hunters. And so Obi-Wan goes after her and sort of befriends her and gets to know her in the process, all the while she is also being hunted by this Inquisitor named Reva, who we find out is working for Vader, and she has some secrets of her own as to why she's going after both Obi-Wan and Leia. So the series unfolds in that regard, all the while talking about Obi-Wan's trauma and dealing with his own guilt and turning Anakin to the dark side and how he feels like maybe he failed him, while also trying to find ways to redeem himself and connect himself back to the Force that he feels so disconnected to now. Now, if you've heard anything about this series, then I am sure that one of the main things you've heard is how controversial it has gotten. This is the unfortunate thing with almost every new Star Wars series, I feel like, ever since The Force Awakens, and I would say even ever since the prequels. The hype has been so heightened up and put up to such a degree that it's almost inevitable that a lot of people are going to be let down by what the series actually is. There's just this common thread, I think, that Star Wars fans build up the hype and then they are almost always let down by what they get. And this one probably had the most hype of any series ever since The Force Awakens, in my opinion. I think The Force Awakens was the last time we had this level of weight put behind a series like this. And I think there is some good reason for that. I think a lot of people were looking forward to the series and were very excited to see Ewan McGregor back. And of course I was too. I had some expectations for this series. I had some hopes for it. But I also tried my best to not, overextend what my expectations were when going into this. And so let's talk about what my reactions are, and then maybe I'll address some of the sort of criticisms that this show has gotten as well. So I am going to keep my response measured. I feel like a lot of people, with almost every Star Wars product, lean too far on one side or the other in terms of their reaction to the show. Some people have hailed this as a masterpiece of television, one of the best things, if not the best thing, that Star Wars has done since the original trilogy, and I personally can't really agree with that, while others seem to hold this in even lower regard than The Last Jedi, which, by the way, my personal opinions on The Last Jedi are a little mixed. I've never really agreed with people who view that one as just utterly irredeemable trash, nor have I agreed with a lot of critics who think it's the best Star Wars movie. So maybe you can gauge what I'll say about the series based on that. But some people view Obi-Wan as even worse than The Last Jedi, and they even had a lot of the same problems with it as they did with The Last Jedi. I lie somewhere in the middle, although I still think my opinions do lean more positive on this show than on a lot of Star Wars products I've seen. I think the last Star Wars project I was truly impressed by was The Mandalorian Season 1, and The Mandalorian Season 2 as well. I think The Mandalorian is the most consistently good Star Wars product we've gotten. I did not like the Book of Boba Fett. I think Obi-Wan is a huge improvement on that show, and I think it'd be disingenuous if you said it wasn't. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the positive aspects of the show. First of all, I think the most obvious positive aspect is Ewan McGregor as himself, as Obi-Wan. I mean, it was just awesome seeing him back in this role. He puts a lot of passion into his performance, in my opinion. He puts a lot of weight into it. And it still feels like the Obi-Wan that we know in some ways from the original trilogy. But there's also some parts of him that have been lost. He is a little bit more cynical now to the Force. He's a little bit more cynical about things in general. He's also a lot weaker. He's been disconnected from the Force for a long time now, living in Tatooine in isolation. And to me, none of this is very surprising. I think it makes sense that Obi-Wan would be so broken by what happened to Anakin, his Padawan, in Episode 3. In his mind, he's dead. He's gone. So it's not surprising to me that he would feel that he had failed and that he didn't really deserve to be connected with the Force anymore because of what he ended up doing to Anakin. It doesn't surprise me that he feels disconnected spiritually to the spiritual powers of the Force. I think that all makes sense. There are going to be spoilers for this. I'm going to be talking about the show as a whole, but Darth Vader is back, and Darth Vader is my favorite aspect of Star Wars. I know I'm not the only one who thinks that, obviously. He's one of the most iconic villains out there, if not the most iconic, and I think for good reason. And if there's one thing that Star Wars has always gotten right, in my opinion, it's been Darth Vader. I think they got him right in Episode 3, of course 4 through 6, and they get him incredibly right here. I think it makes sense how his character acts for the most part throughout the show. There is one criticism that I'll get to a little later, but he is just menacing. He is completely enveloped in the darkest parts of him. We don't really see a whole lot of that redemptive aspects that come to light in Episode 6 in the original trilogy, which I think makes sense. And you get to see him at the height of his power so many times in this show. I personally liked the first lightsaber battle between him and Obi-Wan. It showed just how powerful Vader had become. And of course, the actual ending battle between him and Obi-Wan was incredibly satisfying, seeing Obi-Wan come back to power and everything, but also seeing how powerful Vader still was. And even him getting to have a fight with the Sith Lord Reva, with the Inquisitor Reva, was really good. It was impressive to see him beating her essentially only using the Force. This movie knows what we want out of Vader, and it gives it to us, which is just, I think, awesome. And while we're at it, let's talk about Vivian Blair as Leia. Now, I wasn't necessarily expecting that Leia would be playing such a big role in this series, but the more I thought about it, the more it actually makes sense. And it's almost like Obi-Wan is trying to answer the question, how did Leia end up trusting Obi-Wan so much that she told him that he was their only hope in A New Hope? And I think this series is answering that question, which is interesting. And of course, Obi-Wan isn't going to interact with Luke much, if at all, in the series, so they had to find something else for him to do. And I think a good choice was for him to interact with Leia. It gave him something to work off of, and I think it made him rebuild himself as a mentor and a teacher throughout the series, which I think was a good choice because he had obviously felt very torn down and like he'd failed as a mentor and a teacher. I really liked the relationship between them two, and I think Vivian Blair was good as Leia. Like the prequels, so many people have attacked her, although maybe not as viscerally as they did Anakin, but I think we need to be careful, especially when talking about child actors. They're so young and they have so much to learn, and I think attacking them and making them feel unwelcome just isn't a good look on some of the fan base's parts. And I personally don't think she was that bad. Now, was she perfect? No, and she definitely had some flawed moments. But I overall thought she was very pleasant and delightful to watch. It was also a pleasant surprise to see Joel Edgerton back as Owen. I love this actor. He's another one that I view as severely underrated, and if anything, I would have loved to have had more of him in the show. I think the dynamic between him and Obi-Wan is really interesting, and I think there's a lot more they could have done with that. But nevertheless, I did like him, as well as the actress who played Beru. I think she was good. Indira Varma is great as Tia. She provides an interesting counterpart to Obi-Wan, and I like how she sort of lights a fire of inspiration in him as well. And I think where her character ends up and the sacrifice that she makes her a fairly likable character, even if she isn't the most interesting character in the world, at least to me. Now, let's talk about Reva. And I think with this, we're going to sort of transition into some of my critiques as well for this show, although it'll be peppered in with some positives as well. Now, a lot of people did not like Reva. Now, I have some conflicting opinions on this character, I will admit. I think that Moses Ingram plays her really well, personally. I think she does a good job of portraying this character who we don't know everything about her. She's probably the most mysterious character in the show, the one that has the most things to unveil about her. And I like that she initially plays her as this very ambitious inquisitor who is wanting to get to the top of the ladder. I actually think that aspect of her arc is more interesting than where her arc eventually goes. I wouldn't call Reva a bad character, but I would call her sort of inconsistent. And I think my problems actually start when it's revealed what her backstory is in episode 5, that she was a part of the Order 66 attacks, that she was a child, a youngling in the attacks, and she saw Anakin killing her friends and everything like that. And so her ultimate motivation is not to get in Vader's good graces necessarily, but to get revenge on him in whatever means possible. And it plays out, in my opinion, like a lot of weaker revenge stories play out, where it gives the same theme, the type of theme you'd be expecting. And honestly, when this motivation is revealed, I think Reva's character becomes a bit weaker. It doesn't make sense that she is so traumatized by what happened to her as a child and by how she saw a Sith Lord treated a child, but then she is so very willing to torture a child herself. I suppose you could say that in her mind the ends justify the means, but personally I view that aspect of her as a little inconsistent, and I think it would be disingenuous to not point that out. And ultimately her character just sort of becomes uninteresting by the end of the show, sadly. I feel like her original ambition to become Grand Inquisitor would have been a fine enough character arc, and for them to maybe keep her on that trajectory, rather than doing what they've done with almost every main Sith character, which is make them someone who is ultimately broken and needs redemption. I didn't like when they did this with Kylo Ren, and I do not think they need to do it with every main Sith character like Disney seems to think that they need to. I will also say that some parts of Obi-Wan's character arc can be a little inconsistent. I do really like where he ended up by the end of the show, but there are some places where maybe it's a little inconsistent in terms of what we're seeing on the screen. And there are also some places where I will admit that Obi-Wan acts a little dumber than I would expect him to. Like, there's this scene where him and Leia are getting on this stormtrooper cruiser, well, this cruiser that houses people of the Order, and Obi-Wan calls Leia by her name instead of the name that he made up for her, or rather the name she made up for herself in that instance, and he just slips up and calls her Leia. I don't think that's something that Obi-Wan would do, and I think that's sort of a problem. Also, there are definitely some scenes where you can nitpick at how sort of silly they are. Like, there's a scene where Obi-Wan is fighting against these stormtroopers, these 3 stormtroopers, and he is able to beat them pretty handily. But then suddenly a new group of stormtroopers comes along, and suddenly he's all ready to surrender now. I will also say that I think Obi-Wan's power, his regaining of his Force knowledge, could have been progressed more consistently throughout the episodes, because I would debate that in episodes 1 through 4, he's pretty weak in the Force, which like I said, think makes sense. But then suddenly in episodes 5 and 6, it seems like he has it all back again. Like he's suddenly able to do these incredible feats, like hold a huge amount of water back just with the Force. Or in that final battle with Darth Vader, he seems to be about as on form as he was in episode 3. And I just don't think that that is something that makes a whole lot of sense in the way that they had developed his Force powers throughout. I understand that he was starting to gain his optimism back through his interactions with Leia, and as well as other people who were continuing to inspire him and have hope again. And I like that aspect. I like that sort of thematic arc that he goes through. But the fact that he gets his fighting powers and his Force powers in such a quick manner is something that I feel is a little inconsistent. And of course, there's other scenes that you can sort of nitpick at, I think, if you really want to, like the fact that it is sort of silly that Leia is able to outrun people so often in this series, that she's able to outrun these fully grown adult bounty hunters when they could have, I think, just stunned her with a gun, and they surely should have been able to catch up to her, but they were acting like a bunch of bumbling idiots, and I don't really buy that that would be the case. Or in the scene where Obi-Wan and her are in a big city, and she's able to outrun Obi-Wan almost effortlessly, which once again is just not something I would buy. I also think Kumail Nanjiani's character, Haja, is very underused. I actually really liked his character, but we barely get to know anything about him, and it's sort of a shame to me that they underused him, similarly to the way that they underused Owen. So overall, is this the masterwork of a show I was expecting or hoping for? No, it's really not. And I'm glad that I didn't really hype myself up too much, so I wasn't really left feeling disappointed by this show. And there are still some things about it that I really, really like. I think the strong aspects of the show are really strong. I think Ewan McGregor's performance as Obi-Wan is excellent. I personally like overall the character arc that Obi-Wan goes through, even if there are some sort of inconsistencies in there, in my opinion. I love Darth Vader in this. I think he is portrayed in such a fun and menacing way, and the fights between him and Obi-Wan, I think both of them are good in their own ways. I really liked Leia as a character, and I think the character development between her and Obi-Wan was a huge highlight. But there are some problems with this series, I think that much is clear. I think some of the choreography of chase scenes and some of the action is a little underdeveloped outside of the lightsaber fights. I think a lot of the shootout scenes are sort of dull, personally, and there's definitely some scenes where I think certain characters make decisions that don't make sense. I was going to talk about this, I'll go ahead and talk about it now. There's a scene where Reva and Vader are fighting, and Vader beats Reva, but then decides not to kill her. And I just thought that scene was really perplexing. I don't get why he wouldn't do that. I suppose you could analyze reasons for it, but it just seems like she was given plot armor there for the reason that they wanted to keep her alive. I just don't get why Vader wouldn't decide to kill her. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And like I said, Reva's character throughout this series becomes more inconsistent as it goes on. I won't say I dislike her character, because I don't, but there are some aspects of her character that I wish they would have sort of not gone that route, but it's okay, I guess. It's just not my favorite thing, and I think Reva should have had her own show along with the other Inquisitors. I think that would have worked far better than placing her in a show about Obi-Wan, personally. But, I mean, overall, I liked this show. I didn't love it, necessarily, outside of Episode 6, which I think is just excellent. I think Episode 6 is masterful. By far, I think it's the best episode of the show and some of the best Star Wars moments we've ever seen. And Episode 5 has some really good moments as well. But I think Episodes 1 through 4 have plenty of places where you could critique them, and even Episode 5 has some moments like there's this disguise that Obi-Wan wears that it's like, really? That's your disguise? And you're hiding Leia under that coat and nobody would notice? There are definitely some scenes like that that are easy targets for criticism, and some places where I feel like they move things along for the sake of plot convenience. So, I don't know. Overall, I guess I'd rate this series somewhere between a 3.5 and a 4 out of 5 stars. I think my rating could fluctuate depending on what my feeling is. I'm going to play it safe for now and say that I would give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, with that leaning on the stronger side of things. Because the things I did enjoy in here, I really enjoyed. And honestly, the just virulent criticism this show has gotten from people, a lot of it, I mean, there's some I think that is valid, but I think how over the top it has gotten just doesn't make sense to me. I think people are overanalyzing this show, and I think it's something that is easy to enjoy. That's just my personal thoughts on it. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Obi-Wan as a show. What did you think about Obi-Wan Kenobi? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James. I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. So if anything like that sounds interesting, then leave this video a like, and subscribe to my channel for future content like that. And until then, I will see you all in the next video.